This active teaching tip is about giving multiple examples. Especially for key or complex concepts, giving multiple examples can be really powerful. Even just 2 examples will have a much greater effect than one, and it's more than just an additive effect. Providing a second example of something has an amplified effect on understanding the core concept. This is because deep understanding of a concept comes from the ability to compare and contrast examples against each other. What got me interested in this is research looking into the benefits of something called varied practice or varied learning. Let me show you an example of what varied practice is and how it benefits learning. So in this study, children practiced throwing beanbags to a target on the floor. Half did all of their practicing throwing to a target at a fixed distance, which was 3 feet for the 8-year-olds in the study, and the other half threw to targets that were closer or further away, in this case 2 feet and 4 feet. After the learning sessions and a delay, all of the children were tested at the distance used in the fixed practice condition, at 3 feet. Now, which group would common sense tell us would do better when tested at 3 feet? The children who practiced at the tested distance would perform better, right? But the opposite was true. Group 2 outperformed Group 1. They didn't just perform as well, they performed better. This study really shows us the benefits of experiencing variations when learning something new. In this case, it may be that the children in Group 2 learned something about how to make slight throwing adjustments for differing targets, and that this outweighed any benefits of being tested at the practice distance. And I also want to point out that while this was a motor perceptual task, and most of the varied practice literature has focused on motor learning, the benefits of varied practice have been shown in the cognitive or thinking realm as well. So how do we go from throwing beanbags to understanding a concept? I feel like the use of a Venn diagram might help. In the center of this diagram, we have a concept that we want students to understand. Now, despite our description of a concept seeming perfectly clear to us as content experts, new concepts are rarely clear to students who don't have the necessary background knowledge to make sense of the new concept. So let's say we give an example of the concept. And students know example 1 here represents the concept, but they aren't going to know which features of the example are defining of the concept and which features are just idiosyncratic to that particular example. According to this Venn diagram, anything falling within that center space is part of the concept. But anything outside of it, including the remaining portion of example 1, is just one variation of the concept and may not represent the heart of it. Without more examples, students can't clearly define the concept. However, if we add a second example, students can now look to the overlap between the examples and know that the defining boundaries of the concept are somewhere in that olive green area. However, we could do better, right? Because example 1 and example 2 do have some overlap that falls outside of the defining boundaries of the concept. So we add a third example, and we can see that the more examples we provide, the more clarity there is about the defining boundaries of the concept. It's where all 3 examples overlap. So more examples mean a more clearly defined concept. However, it is important for students to not only see where examples overlap, but also how they differ, because the differences illustrate how free a concept is to vary, how far and in what directions can the concept extend. So similarities and differences among examples matter when defining a concept, and more examples mean more opportunities to see similarities and differences. Let's take another look at this Venn diagram with an actual example. Let's say we want students to understand the concept of conformity. Each of these circles represents an example of conformity, but it is in the middle where they all overlap that we have the heart of the concept, what all of the examples would have in common. Let's say we give the following example of conformity. You start a new job and you notice that the other employees wear a certain brand of polo shirt. You hurry out and buy those shirts. While this example is a good example of the concept of conformity, by itself, students may think conformity is the same as if the manager tells all new employees to wear polo shirts. So we add a second example. Here is the second example. You attend your first orchestra concert. The concertmaster comes onto the stage and the audience applauds. You applaud too, but you aren't sure why. With two examples, it becomes more clear that conformity isn't doing something because one has been told to, but rather because everyone else is doing it. But it still may not be clear why someone would do what others are doing. So let's add one more example. Here's our last example. A high school student is hanging out with his friends late one night. The group decides it would be fun to spray paint lewd drawings on the wall of the school. The student feels like he has to go along and take part. So, with three different examples, students can develop a much clearer, richer, and more well-defined understanding of the concept of conformity than if they had just heard one. And hopefully you can see how each additional example has a multiplicative effect, not just an additive effect. And we can see that represented in the variety of colors we are starting to get. We don't just have red, green, and blue, but we also have olive, turquoise, purple, and then finally where they all overlap, a darker turquoise color that I don't have a name for, but that represents the point where all three examples overlap. I'd like to quickly show you an analogy for this multiplicative effect when you provide additional examples of a concept. This analogy comes from how we see color, since I teach a course on sensation and perception. Humans can generally see a huge variety of colors, as represented by the visible spectrum rainbow you see here. The fascinating thing is that all of these colors are generated by just three types of receptor cells in our eyes, called cones. Each of the three cones is maximally responsive to a certain limited range of colors, but combined with their overlap and their breadth of coverage, we get the visible spectrum that most humans are able to see. Take a look at the difference in this spectrum of distinguishable colors here. This represents what colors an individual with deuteranopia, a form of color blindness, might see. Deuteranopia occurs when the green cone is not functional. There is still a spectrum of distinct colors that can be seen, but the spectrum is not nearly as vibrant without a functional green cone. So if you want to help students make sense of concepts in your course, multiple examples with a bit of variability in them will help them fill in that whole spectrum of understanding. When it comes to implementing this tip in the classroom, it's quite straightforward. Give more than one example, especially for those concepts that are big, meaning they are essential to the course, and for concepts that are messy and more difficult to grasp. And to bring things to a close, consider for a moment, what concept from one of your courses could benefit from multiple examples? Is there a concept students tend to struggle with? One that is foundational for other concepts of the course?